everyone. Welcome to this edition of Beyond the Box. My name is Diana, and I'll be your guest host tonight. We have a special guest here in our studio. His name is Kevin Ricard, and he'll be giving us a little bit of a background about himself and how he got involved in Planet X, studying Planet X, what exactly Planet X is, and any updates he's come across lately. On behalf of the Lightside UFO Study Group, we'd like to welcome you, Kevin.
Hi. I spent a lot of time in the military or whatever. I had 4 years in the military, and my first assignment was Anderson Air Force Base, Guam. And while I was there, I was a security specialist, they call it. And basically what had happened was there was a plane from NASA that came and landed there, and we were all excited about it. And they said it was a plane with a telescope on it. So we were all curious about it, and finally it was like my turn to work, and the plane was there, and we were looking for the telescope, but you really couldn't see anything. It was just like a black cover over the side of the plane, and it was an infrared telescope on the aircraft. And it turned out they called it Kuiper Airborne Observatory. So I just asked some of the guys that were actually talking to the crew of the plane. They said, yeah, what are they doing over here? You know, why do they have to fly to Guam, you know, with a large aircraft like that to look at stars or whatever? Why can't they just do it in Florida? Well, he just said that they were looking for Planet X. That's all he knew. He said, you know, and I had never even heard of it. I was only like 18 years old at the time, and maybe it was mentioned as like the 10th planet, but Pluto had already been discovered. I mean, there was really nothing out there. So anyway, all I had heard was that the plane was going to be there for 3 days, and then it would take off, you know, approximately 7 p.m., you know, when it's dusk, and the plane could lock onto its target, and then they could, you know, zoom in on it. Now, they didn't say all that, but they just said that there was a window of opportunity at a certain time where they could see this thing. Now, the plane was there for like 3 days, and then it left, and I always asked, did they find it? Did they find it? And I never heard anything. I never heard that they found it or didn't find it. But here I had this insider knowledge now.
So did that spark your curiosity? Is that what got you started on Planet X, researching?
Yeah. Well, actually, no. It wasn't until like years later that I actually. Here's how it worked. Years later, I was on a computer. I bought my wife a computer in '97, and we first hooked up internet to it, and all of a sudden, somebody had just sent me. It was like a pop-up, and it just came up onto my computer about Planet X, and I was just like, I can't believe this, you know. And I really started looking into it. One time, I got an encyclopedia in the mail. You know, it was talking about it had the Planet X. It's called the New Illustrated Science and Invention Encyclopedia. You know, we can get as detailed as we want, but it's got a pretty graphic picture in there, and it has the orbit of Planet X the way I like to explain it. It's not, Planet X is not linear with the other planets. It actually like the way we see the moon revolve around the Earth, and then the Earth revolves around the sun, and all the other planets are all on a linear path. Okay, it's like flat. And it's going around and around. Okay. Now Planet X would be going like 90 degrees opposed to that. It would be going like, instead of horizontal, it would be going vertical.
Okay, so this got you started on Planet X. What have you learned? They don't have much of this in the media, right? But I heard, was it Mark Hazelwood talked about it? Certain newspapers in 1983 picked up on Planet X.
Yeah, being that I had the prior knowledge that they were looking for this, I was waiting in the papers for it to come out that there was Planet X, and I think it did come out eventually that they found Planet X, but they didn't give that Kuiper Airborne Observatory any credit. They said it was a IRAS satellite, IRAS, and it seems like back in the late 90s, it seemed like NASA actually gave us more access to real information than we have now. And another thing is that I found out that a lot of the information or the pictures that the satellite had, a great volume of photographs are for internal use only, they call it. They don't say classified, but they call it for internal use only. What I feel is that because Planet X was published in a few of these books actually in the 90s, is that when the government found out the results of what Planet X could do or would do, all of a sudden it became a classified topic, just like UFOs. It became probably NSA level, whatever information.
So why do you think the government is keeping the information from the people?
Well, that's simple, because this planet, when it comes around, I think after they started looking into it, they found that it had catastrophic consequences to the Earth. And that would come into talking about a pole shift, which is, we'd have to credit Jim McCanney, even though the first time I heard about a pole shift was in Discover magazine. I was recently doing a talk in Dundee, Wisconsin, and somebody was asking me, like, where are you getting all this information? Well, you know, when you subscribe to Discover magazine, you're gonna find just these little tiny articles, and they'll have like real short stories on what they discover or what they did. A lot of times, here's the problem, right? They're talking about this pole shift, and they're saying like the evidence kind of like, oh, it's looking like, you know, there had to be a pole shift here because this part of the planet was either at the North Pole at one time, or this part of the planet was in a different place than what it is now. And that's not talking a magnetic pole shift either. That's different.
Physical pole shift?
A physical pole shift, and it doesn't mean that the North Pole becomes a South Pole either. It could be just like the Earth just changing like 20 or 30 degrees, 45 degrees, but significant enough to change the continents, you know, basically from where they are. And then again, there'd be water washing over the continents.
Well, that explains why there's tropical things found in the Arctic or the frozen tundra, or fossilized fish in deserts.
Exactly. And I was telling Diana just the other day how I was in Wyoming, and it's basically a warm, not a warm, but it's a very arid, dry. Uh, it's elevation. It's like around 6,000 feet, plus or minus 2,000 feet, in various locations. But um, basically, what I found when I was there is that this was like a tropical environment at one time. I actually found some palm wood there. You can too. And I was at a place called Legend Rock. There's fossilized wood, and there's logs that are quite large, and it just is like so out of place. Because when you go there, all you see is small plants and cactus, and there's like no trees whatsoever out there. And it just shows, like also in Big Sandy Reservoir in the southwestern section of the state, it shows how there's a good geological record there, how times have changed. You can still find palm wood on the top of the dirt there. It's so exciting. You could just there's a lot of history just right there, and it didn't get destroyed completely. Some of the ages, everything did rot away, and so in other words, things passed away slowly, but other things were covered up quickly. And I would imagine that would have to do with the volcanic blast or something, possibly where Yellowstone had erupted and possibly killed everything instantly, and then there's a very good preservation of all the animals there and stuff.
I was going to ask you about Planet X. It's got an orbit around the sun or whatever. Is there a cycle? I understand there to be a cycle, but can you explain a little bit of that? Because when you think about it, it could explain some of the things in history, the flood, before, even prior, if it comes around in a cyclical pattern.
I think it does come around in a cyclical pattern, but I have to believe, though, that after I started studying some excerpts out of the Bible, and I don't have them all in front of me today, but there's quite a few, and a lot of them refer to the day of our Lord, and that would be like when a Planet X passage goes by. And I know this is hard to believe, but I honestly believe that this Planet X comes by and it's like a tool that God uses. And what it is another term that Jim McCanney came up with. It's called action at a distance. And if somebody were to want to create destruction on the earth, God or whatever, you could simply change the trajectory of this Planet X by just a little bit here or there, and it's going to greatly differentiate the amount of destruction that would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, I don't want people to get confused that there's like direct contact. Everyone thinks like an asteroid smashing the Earth. That would be separate. But it is possible, though, and it's been talked about, that this Planet X has a heavy gravitational pull, and it could be carrying with it an entourage of extrasolar objects. And you don't know. In fact, one idea that I had heard was that Venus was actually dragged into our solar system by Planet X in the past, and Venus had a close encounter with Mars. And being that Venus was the bigger planet and had more gravitational pull, they're saying that Venus actually came so close to Mars that it stripped the oceans and the atmosphere right off it.
I've heard that somewhere, not about Venus, but about Mars's atmosphere being stripped off.
Yes.
But could that explain the floods?
Actually, yes, it can. And some of the people call Venus the Death Star, and they're saying that it looked like a snake, and they said that some Chinese astronomers actually witnessed that this had happened. That Venus actually stripped off the ocean, and they could see it, and it looked like a snake, like as it was pulling it off. And as right now, I think one of the mysteries of Venus is that they can't figure out why the atmosphere is so thick. They can't understand why it's so thick for that size of planet. Also, Venus does not have a magnetic field. Okay, and that would indicate that Venus is like a newcomer into the solar system. And it's kind of funny. It's like a lot of the things that we talk about here have to be credited to Jim McCanney, because he explains that the solar objects that we have in our solar system may not always be like have been there for billions and billions of years, that things actually come and go, and that things get captured, and that we're actually living in more like a dynamic solar system than more of a static one that never changes. And I think they're finding that out, like with that moon Titan, the moon of Saturn, and they're studying that, and they're studying other planets as well, or other solar bodies as well. But they're thinking more and more that things were actually captured and just got captured by the orbit of the sun, and they started going around, and that's what changed everything. But right now, the atmosphere on Mars is actually coming back, and at least that's one of the excuses that NASA has for all their spacecraft crashing on there. Basically, they're saying that as the spacecraft entered the atmosphere, there's a little bit too much atmosphere there, and too much friction, and things weren't engineered right, and either the craft burned up or it hit the surface too hard.
Let's mention McCanney's website, because he has done, plus he studied a lot of Immanuel Velikovsky's stuff. Got to give him some credit too. But McCanney's website is www.jmccanneyscience.com.
JMCCANNEY science.com. And yeah, I knew, like in the 90s too, that the weather, the way they were forecasting it, was all wrong. That they had to have it figured wrong. They had to have it figured backwards, because the weather was like way too severe for what they were predicting, and their computer models were way off on a constant basis. And then even as I was watching Fox News a few times, there was a lot of telltale signs. Things were happening over California that weren't right. They were saying, yeah, this weather system should have moved east by now, and it's stuck there. There was just like all this abnormal weather happenings, and people were getting killed. Actually, for a while there in the mid 90s, I think 30 people were getting killed a day by like tornadoes, like in the springtime.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, part of that that new national security setup that they have uh, had weather involved in it.
Oh, Homeland Security.
Homeland Security, right? Yeah, because some of the guys that had government jobs, they were at my gun club, and I heard that mention that they couldn't understand why they had weather in there too, but that was a part of it.
But you know that somebody knows something's going on with the weather. What affects the weather? Nothing affects global weather but the sun, right? And what affects the sun?
Well, the thing is okay. I can go into that later, but you know, there's a lot of talk about that harp. They blame that harp for every little thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying that the harp can change the weather and all this and that, and it's just like, yeah, well, I believe that they might have some control on that, or they might be able to do something, but I don't think they're doing things on a global scale. A lot of times when there was bad weather, anyways, I would Soho, it's SOHO, Soho satellite webpage of NASA, and you can see the space weather right there. And then a lot of times, first what happens is you get a solar storm, and in the solar storm, basically, it comes like 2 days before that, and then you get a strong solar wind, and basically it's like charged particles from the solar wind hitting the Earth, and it basically shows that our whole weather system is electrically driven. So,
which makes sense. If, like McCanney says, everything's electric and connected in our solar system. Probably in the universe, huh?
yeah, it's basically what he says, but I'm not trying to imitate him or trying to pretend that I'm coming up with it or anything like that. I'm just saying that that's where I started learning about that. And Jim McCanney is also talks about Planet X, and of course, you know, no one's actually saying that it's a planet with people on it or anything like that. It could be a small brown dwarf star that they just came up with this term recently, and it could be actually anything that could be black, could be anything, because I don't believe that this thing is readily seeable. In fact, we're going to try to get a video of some Native Americans on the West Coast up by Oregon, and they talk about this raven coming up.
Explain what their tribal name means.
Well, I don't actually have the name of their tribe, but the name means the survivors of the Great Flood. So, and here, these people were indigenous to this area, obviously, and they weren't. Their name has no reference to religious Bible or anything at all. They're just speaking on fact. They know that they originally, the first tribal members were simply survivors of a great flood that they said came all the way up to the mountains. And they survived that. And now that they're talking about this raven coming back, and the raven sits on top of their totem pole, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And it says they're going to come from the south, and that'll be the end of this world, they say. So, but that doesn't mean it's the end of the world, though.
Yeah, I think
it still goes on.
when you hear end times, people think it's the end of the world, but I think it's the end of these troubled times, like you talked about earlier, that God may use this planet X as like I'm thinking a cleansing. He knows the cycle. He knows when it might come by, and he's going to take care of business when it comes by.
I think, you know, what would happen is, like, he could slow it up or speed it up depending on the behavior of the people, or he could change it to where it's real mild and hardly anything happens. I honestly believe that. So I think what it is it depends on the outcome of the people of the world.
Like the spiritual level.
Yeah.
I've heard that this passage could be as gentle as a sunset, but that would mean that every man, woman, and child would have to kind of change their ways.
Yeah. And it says it again and again in the Bible. It says that you have to follow God's rules and you have to obey him. And it says in there, as long as people follow God and obey all his rules, that he's always going to keep the water falling to the earth, and he's going to always provide for the people. And, you know, it's kind of funny. It's like when I started getting into UFOs and all that stuff, I kind of wondered if, you know, I was going to come across all this information where all of a sudden God didn't exist. But it showed that God does exist. And it's like kind of like a woven thread or a yarn. And like God is part of the strands of the threads, and the UFO is another part of it, and then the supernatural is another part of it.
Let's talk about biblical ties. You were talking earlier about something mentioned in the Bible. Is Planet X mentioned in the Bible that you know of? I mean, it's a major thing.
Yeah,
Did somebody write about it?
I feel that every place it says the day of the Lord is mentioning something about like a Planet X passage or whatever. And I don't know if you want me to read something.
Go ahead.
Okay. And this is Revelation 6, line 12. And I saw when he had opened the sixth seal, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the whole of the moon became as blood. And the stars of heaven fell to the earth as a fig casting her untimely figs when shaken by a mighty wind. And the heaven departed as a scroll rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the officers, and the rich, and the mighty, and every servant and free man hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains. And it was said that the mountains and rocks fall upon us and conceal us from the face of him that sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand? So basically, God and Jesus are taking credit for this, you know, for this catastrophe. And I was telling Diana before, this isn't, obviously this is very old, and this was like in the missalette that I had when I was growing up, when I was in Catholic school. And everyone had to say this, you know, like, you know, the couple lines there with the sun became black as sackcloth, and the moon became as blood, and the stars fell to the earth. And that all these lines were in that missalette. And I remember asking the nuns about it, and of course they didn't have a clue about it. But yet everyone in the church says it. And I often wonder, does the Vatican know? what that means, and do they actually put it in there to tell people like as a warning, but then they never talk about it because I've never heard this talked about. So, anyways, I don't know if you mind, Diana, but could I try to explain it a little bit?
Yep. Go ahead.
So it says that they open up a sixth seal and there was a great earthquake. Okay, and then like I was talking about before, it was in Discover magazine about a pole shift, but even though the evidence pointed to that, they couldn't figure out what the trigger would be. Well, this great earthquake could be this big solar body coming just close to the Earth, not right next to it, but within a certain distance, and the sun became black. Okay, so then the sun becomes blacked out. Then it says the moon became as blood, and actually, to tell you the truth, when we cast a shadow on the moon, just with the Earth, it becomes very red. So that's up to interpretation. There's a lot of talk in the Bible, and I've read in Velikovsky where red dust actually comes from outer space and falls to the Earth. In that Worlds in Collision book, there's some very good stories about that, even from the Egyptian side.
Okay.
When this red dust fell to the Earth, and it's very soluble with water, and it just stops people from being able to have a drink. But so anyway, it talks about, and the stars of heaven fell to the earth. And it says, as a fig tree casting her untimely figs when shaken by a mighty wind. And what they're seeing is, it looks like the stars are falling, like the stars are moving. But obviously we know now that the stars aren't moving. They're not all going to move. It's the earth moving. And basically that would be like the pole shift. The outer crust is moving over basically the mantle of the earth, which would probably stay the same. So actually it would be the whole crust of the earth moving over a molten mantle. And that's what would create that effect. And it said, the heaven departed as a scroll rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And it very clearly, in I recall as a kid, I hated art class and I hated all these other classes, but I was so interested in science, and I believe that the church and the Bible were real. I had no reason to doubt anything, and I never really did. But it's just like, I'm trying to figure out as a kid, how could every mountain and island be moved out of their place? It kind of doesn't make sense to you, right?
Right.
But this pole shift explains that perfectly. And it says all the people were trying to hide in the caves and the rocks and the mountains, and it basically they were just scared to death because actually they're saying this is going to happen, but I'm sure that this happened in the past, and it's just like people that don't believe in it, or there's probably going to be no warning about this if it does happen. And
I mean, right now would be a perfect time for the government to start warning the people. You know what I'm saying?
I don't think they would, because
well, the economy's got to go on. Everything's...
people would just start hoarding food, and people would be trying to dig tunnels into the ground and stuff. And
you mean like the elite already have? Military tunnels,
but
underground bunkers and supplies.
They might just be creating a tomb
That's what I'm thinking. If tectonic plates are moving and every mountain is out of place, I'm thinking they could just get crushed and buried in their little supply shelters.
Yeah, I had read uh, some old account. I'm trying to find it again, but I had read it in an account that was quite old from Europe, and it talked about actual like, and when this happened last time, that there was actual like tidal waves in the earth. In other words, like the earth was like you could see large waves, and I know like in earthquakes, there's actually like waves too that go across, the affected zone or whatever, and they said that these waves were consuming people, and there was lava coming out of, the ground, just like where you wouldn't even imagine it. Just all of a sudden, oh yeah, there's lava coming out there. But I actually came across such a place. Yeah, believe it or not, I was going through some Colorado State Park. Uh, it's like Rocky Mountain State Park up there by Estes Park. Uh, it was supposed to be geologically new, they called it, and it was like a place of great upheaval because there was like three waterfalls in one place, and they said it had to be geologically new because erosion should have made that like just one like river, one solid river, but there was like three little waterfalls in one place, and they said, well, that has to be pretty new because it's not eroded down and etc etc. And I thought, it just doesn't make sense. But what does make sense is that in that area there was some great upheaval, and the earth upheaved in those spots, probably created by like a passing planet X or whatever. And it just basically distorted that section and created that waterfall the way it is. And not only that, but uh, there's lava coming right out of the hillside. Not presently, but the lava rocks are there.
We were talking the other day, and you mentioned something about trumpet sound because McCanney also mentioned a trumpet sound with the passage of Planet X. But what I found very curious is if you look at the Bible, there are trumpet judgments, and all of them seem to have to do with something, a great star falling from the sky. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, basically what they feel that trumpet sound is, and I'm saying they because I guess there's accounts back in the ancient times that there was like a sound like a trumpet blowing, and what it was is it's actually an electrical effect created between like you'd have to study McCanney's comet plasma discharge theory. And basically, when it is when another solar body passes through space, there's like a electrical connection basically between you, this object, and the sun or whatever. And this electrical effect has a sound to it, and it's like a loud trumpet sounding, and from what I imagine, it would be like deafening and very scary to any inhabitant that's trying to survive,
Mm-hmm.
because of course they're not going to know anything about that either. And this electrical effect probably is going to have like the creatures just coming out of the ground, whatever like worm, bugs, everything. There's this deep, long past track record with Planet X. It's not a fad or a passing fancy. There's a lot of astronomers that spent their whole life looking for Planet X. And in fact, as I told you, Diana, before, that's how Pluto was discovered, was actually the search for Planet X.
Okay.
Planet X has a vast history, and you can trace back the record that they're searching for it. And it was all based on the perturbation of the orbit of Uranus, and then I think of Neptune too. A lot of people are trying to say that Planet X was Planet Pluto then, but Pluto can't. It's too small to.
I was going to say they just demoted Planet or
yeah,
Pluto.
it's too small to really do anything to a larger planet, and basically it's just a mixing of numbers and whatever, and they just came up with creative ways to dismiss Planet X. But I believe Planet X is very real, and I also think that the United States has a very nice radio telescope in Antarctica, stationed at a U.S. base down there.
So southern hemisphere. It's visible from the southern hemisphere.
That's where it would come in, from the southern hemisphere, and I believe completely that the government they actually have some sort of astronomy station, and it's actually built on hydraulics because the snow never melts, and every time the snow falls, they gotta basically lift their telescope up higher to the whole station. But that's just another piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. There have been people in the past, like you were talking about Harrington.
Yeah.
That other people have been searching for Planet X or researching for Planet X. And I don't know if he died mysteriously, but he's no longer living. Sometimes you don't live long if you try to break some of this news out to people.
Yeah, he died under mysterious circumstances. Basically, this whole thing is about showing people that there's a vast history behind this Planet X, and that's what I found out. I think the government takes this thing very seriously, and I think Russia and the United States know it's there, and I think a lot of people that would listen to this radio show probably would understand or believe that there's a lot of U.S. military and government underground bases, and this Planet X is the whole reason behind that, is hoping that they can survive the passage with very little or damage or infrastructure problems. Well, they're going to have infrastructure problems no matter what, but
like maybe what do you call it, interference with the government system. They want to still remain in power, right?
Right. But I think after this thing passes, that's going to be the start of the new age. And whenever that comes, I think it's completely up to the people. If they start following God again, and they go away from what they're doing now, is trying to explain everything without God, and basically, like evolution, I feel is an explanation of science without God. And what I found was, when I started looking into evolution, is that a lot of the professors were basically atheists that don't believe in God at all, and that's what the whole thing is all about.
We'd like to thank our guest, Kevin Ricard, for his update on Planet X and Earth changes and many other topics. So I'd like to say thank you for joining us on this episode of Beyond the Box, and keep looking up.